I'll jump right into it. We'll go into this a little bit more, but as you can see, that's an outline of the country itself, and then the red dot represents the approximate location of the actual city of Mariupol. So, the topic just, even though it's not covered much in Western media these days, the crisis is still going on. There's still quite a bit of death and destruction, and Mariupol has been a flashpoint. It continues to be so. Not many of the reports, again, make our news, but that city especially, that's the specialist location of quite a few ceasefire violations every single day. All right. So here I'm just going to give kind of a brief overview of the crisis itself for those who may or may not be familiar with it. I won't touch on every single one, but as some people know, the crisis began after then-President Yanukovych suspended negotiations for greater integration with the European Union. Lots of people were protesting in Kiev and other major cities. Eventually, there were some deaths in some of the protests. These were blamed on police. I believe there were even some police officers who were killed in the violence. We're obviously a lot of the blame for that. Then shortly after the violence spiked, he signed a constitution deal that would have returned Ukraine to a previous version of its constitution. Shortly after that, though, he fled Kiev, and then he was impeached. It caused a bit of controversy because he was impeached under the current version of the constitution, and the procedures for impeaching him would have changed if the deal that he had signed returning it to the earlier constitution had gone into effect. So there was some question over whether or not his impeachment was legal. There was a lot of argument around that, but he did flee the country, and he did even give up his position as president from outside the country. So the crisis continued. You saw protests on both sides. Eventually, protests sparked in Donetsk, which is a city. It's one of the states in Ukraine, but it's also a city to the north of Mariupol. With Russia getting involved in Crimea, they were eventually expelled from the G8. Then you saw protests spike again. You saw protesters seizing government buildings in Donetsk, and then Luhansk is another state. It's further north of the state of Donetsk. Then you can see there towards the middle, Malaysian Airlines 17 was shot down. Then came the Minsk I agreement, one of the first major attempts at a ceasefire, but then the very next day, shelling of Mariupol resumed. So similar with the Minsk II there at the end, these ceasefire agreements, although they were usually hailed, especially in Western media, they typically didn't have much of an effect on actually reducing the violence. You saw not only violations of the ceasefire, you saw specifically prohibited weapons being used within days of those agreements being signed. So now just some quick history on the city itself. You can see there's a map there showing the states of Donetsk and Luhansk. The city of Donetsk itself, which was the regional capital of that state until it was taken by the Russian-backed separatists, and then Mariupol there further to the south. That whole region of those two states is commonly referred to as Donbass. So the title of the presentation was Mariupol, the Gates of Donbass. There's not an official border to the region called Donbass, but it's typically accepted that it's those two states. So the city of Mariupol was first founded as Pavlovsk in 1778. It had been a settlement of various cultures before then, but that's when it was actually established as a city. The name was changed to Mariupol shortly thereafter. Roads were built in the late 1800s. It was renamed under the communists in 1948, but then, of course, after the Soviet Union, well, when the Soviet Union was collapsing, it was renamed to Mariupol again, and it's retained that name ever since. On to the next. So one of the reasons why the city is very important to both sides is because of its economy. It isn't the most valuable economic city in the country, but it is one of the most valuable in that region. So as you can see, it's got some heavy machinery industries. Azovmash is one of the largest. Azovstal Iron and Steelworks and Illich Iron and Steelworks are They are the two largest in the country. The sea gateways of Donbass, it's the second largest shipping port. It's second only to Odessa. So this obviously supplies a lot of raw materials to the industries. It can export the products of those industries. It's linked by rail to several other major cities in that portion of Ukraine. So it's a hub. And obviously, it being a large port, it can also be used for military purposes if necessary. So that makes it strategically important. So on to a quick overview of the demographics. As of the last official census, population was just over 475,000. It is 49% ethnic Ukrainian, 44% ethnically Russian, although 89% identify Russian as the primary language. And so as we've seen with places like Crimea and other regions in eastern Ukraine, when you've got a region that has a heavy Russian has a heavily influential Russian population and a lot of the people there speak Russian, Russia tends to claim that it has some kind of a responsibility to protect the people there from what they see as abuses by the local government. That's usually one of the main justifications they'll use for getting involved. So a little more detail on why the city is important for both Kiev and for the Russian-backed separatists. For Kiev, obviously, it's a valuable port, the economy and industry, which we've already talked about. It's the regional capital of the state right now. That used to be Donetsk. When the separatists took over the city of Donetsk, when it became a part of the territory that they had taken, Kiev named Mariupol as the new regional capital. And there was a point when the separatists managed to push the Kiev forces out for a short time, but they have taken it back and they've held on to it. I'll go into that a bit more later. Another important aspect is that it does help to stop further expansion west. There will be a map later on that shows a little more of is right now. And so with the separatists wanting to take obviously the entire state of Donetsk and even more, Mariupol being a major city along that line, it's gonna help the Kiev government stop that expansion. So a lot of the same reasons make it important for the separatists. Couple ones that are different is that it would be a symbolic victory for them. Just taking one more city, especially the second city to become the regional capital, would be a serious blow to the morale of the Kiev-backed forces, and it would be a serious boost to the morale of the Russian-backed forces. It does also provide better defense of Donetsk to the north. So if Kiev holds on to it, it provides more opportunities for them to try and retake Donetsk. If the separatists were to take it, it would solidify their control there. And then I'll go into this a bit more. It would be the first step towards a land bridge to Crimea. Right now, Russia and the Russian-backed forces have no land route to the peninsula of Crimea, which does cause some problems for supply and logistics. They would still need to conquer about 300 kilometers of territory in several other cities in order to complete that land bridge, but this would be an important first step. So one of the solutions proposed, because they don't have a land route, is the Kirk Strait bridge. The Kirk Strait is where the peninsula of Crimea almost meets Russia, but there is still a water route there. So the problem with this is the peninsula of Crimea is not self-sufficient. Before it was taken by, before it was annexed by Russia, it depended on Ukraine for fresh water, food, and electricity. Shortly after it was taken, there was a situation where some power relay stations and other important infrastructure were destroyed, and nobody has officially claimed responsibility for that, but obviously accusations have gone both ways. But it does mean that Crimea has a serious problem with having a steady flow of especially water and electricity. And even if Russia did have this bridge, it wouldn't really be able to fulfill the water and electricity needs effectively. It seems like that problem is going to continue for a while. So this bridge is something that's been proposed, though, to supply some of the things that it needs. The bridge is being constructed by a company owned by, I might mispronounce this, Arkady Rotenberg, who is actually one of Putin's longtime friends, and he's one of his judo sparring partners. One of the interesting aspects that has come up in reporting on this bridge is that several of the workers who have been brought in to work on it and then later either released or fired have spoken to media about the fact that they've been told constantly to look busy, even if they don't have anything to do. Otherwise, if for any reason they're seen taking a break or not looking like they're actively working on the bridge, they do risk being fired and losing all of the money that they had already worked for and been promised. So a little bit more on the bridge and some problems with why, even if it were to be finalized, it probably will not last long, and it's not even very likely that it will be finalized. First off, the cost, $4.5 million US, with the cost of oil continuing to stagnate. The funds that Russia would need for this just aren't really there. It doesn't mean that they're not going to go forward with it, but it's just going to be very difficult to get the funding that they need. Also, it's illegal according to international law. It would affect the shipping through Mariupol. As you can see here, I put the bridge is only being constructed to be 35 meters high for the type of ships that go in and out of the port. It would need to be at least 50 meters high. So some experts have said Kiev needs to be actively pursuing cases in international court to stop Russia from continuing with the construction. There is an environmental impact that's a concern. The oversight and permits were kind of given a rubber stamp. They weren't really explored with the detail that they needed to be. So some problems with this are it just hasn't really been explored how it's going to impact that region. With the geography, there's seismic activity in that region and some mud volcanoes, which means if the bridge were to be finished, it probably would not last very long. The Soviets actually tried to build one a few decades ago, and I believe it lasted 6 months. Granted, technology is a little bit better, but those problems still persist. So even with better technology, it's just not a very ideal place to build a bridge. And the completion has already been pushed back to 2019. So it's not even going to be on the schedule that was originally given if it's completed at all. But it hasn't stopped them from moving forward at this point. So here's another related issue that's important for the conflict, the Shyrokine Demilitarized Zone. It's not actually demilitarized at this point. It was something that was proposed back in 2015 as a part of, I believe, the Minsk II agreement. They were trying to bring it up in the negotiations. The Kiev negotiators kind of stonewalled that, prevented it from actually becoming a major issue of discussion. But the Russians and the Russian-backed separatists have continued kind of hinting that it is something they would like, and Kiev keeps opposing it as much as they can, but there is some political pressure that seems to be building in favor of it just because of a lot of the death and destruction that's going on around Shyrokine and Mariupol. So some of the reasons that Kiev has obviously opposed this idea is because that region actually was already taken in violation of a previous ceasefire. After signing an agreement, they went ahead and took territory. So now they're essentially saying, let's make an agreement that this will now become demilitarized. Whereas several experts, and I believe even some Kiev negotiators, have proposed regions further east that actually would be more ideal because they were not taken in violation of that particular ceasefire. And then, of course, previous demilitarized zones, I read about one in Debaltseve. Even though they were agreed to, they weren't honored. So there's really no reason for them to sign another one if what they've already agreed to hasn't even been honored. So finally, just touching on some recent developments. As I said, there have been a lot of ceasefire violations in this particular region. It's the highest number. And that's coming, the highest number of attacks and the highest number of violations happen around Mariupol, and that's coming from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. The recent Easter ceasefire was one that was particularly, seemed particularly promising, at least in some of the media outlets, but again, within days, it was violated, and you saw 394 attacks. I believe that was in the span of less than 10 days. So one interesting aspect is that mortar attacks are more frequent than artillery. There are several classes of artillery that are outlawed under a lot of these agreements, but they're still used, but it does seem that mortar attacks are kind of the more popular method. And then you also have the problem of unexploded ordnance all throughout eastern Ukraine, but especially around Mariupol. And it's even reaching the point that they have to educate young children of what to do if they see an unexploded shell, because children are finding them on playgrounds and out in fields and such, and they don't really know what to do with them. They sometimes think that they're toys, which obviously causes even more death. And so the ceasefire violations are continuing. And then one interesting aspect of Mariupol in particular is that after the Kiev forces withdrew from the city in mid-2014, Kiev managed to retake it with the help of several paramilitary groups. Some of these are very effective. Some of them are funded by different Ukrainian and other European businessmen who are sympathetic to what Kiev is going through. Unfortunately, they're often attacked in the media. They're often labeled with, they're often labeled as neo-Nazi, just as a way of building political pressure against them. And that is what I have. Yes.
Hi, sorry for coming in late. Chief Official from the Department of State. I wanted to make sure I hear your presentation. I'm very happy that you're looking at this issue. The role of nomenclature is very important.
Yes, sir.
So, for example, the neo-Nazi part is highly debatable, and it's yet the other things you have listed there were facts. That kind of thing is an assertion, and it's mostly. I know the battalion, the Azov battalion.
Yes, sir.
So I know that issue very well, but it's a. One, of course, has to be careful with labeling things depending on the source.
Oh, I'm sorry, was that not clear? It
could have been clear, but,
okay.
that's not a big thing. The issue of, first of all, again, I'm very happy looking at this issue. Mariupol is a key city. Some of the references some of the terms you use are more present typically in the sort of the Russian narrative than the Western narrative, and I was just wondering if that's just a function of your sources, or other things. You keep referring to Kiev forces instead of Ukrainian forces.
Right.
For example, you keep using separatists, even though everyone knows there are no real separatists, and these are Russian proxies. It's very much a Russian operation, for most, not all, but for most intents and purposes. I'm just wondering if you could sort of respond. I don't want to take too much of your time in terms of the nomenclature, the terminology you use, and whether you think it's important or not.
Excuse me, if I may tell the word, because the problem is that Ukraine was very much divided between Poland and Russia, and mentality is totally different. Part wants to belong to the West, and part wants to belong to Russia, and that's it. And once they got independence, they are chaotic. They don't know what to do with it. That's it.
So the reason that some of those terms are being used, it probably is mostly a function of my sources. Now, when it comes to talking about Kiev forces, there are forces there that aren't official government forces. So I was trying to kind of capture them under.
Not for Eastern Europe. It's not longer. They're all either part of the Defense Ministry or the Ministry of Internal Affairs.
Okay.
There are no independent battalions, and haven't been for quite a while.
All right, I'd be interested in sources on that. Okay. It wasn't my intention to paint them in that way. It seemed that there could be some confusion in my sources as to who exactly belonged where. So trying to capture the idea that they were supported from that region instead of just being, I guess, Band-Aid groups.
Thanks for taking that up.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you please tell about your perspectives? Maybe you can make some forecasts of what's going on, and in case of full-scale offensive, do you think Ukrainian army is capable to defend Mariupol, or what the Russian strategy might be? Because as you mentioned, it's crucial for them since they don't have this land corridor, and they tried to seize Mariupol in early 2015 when they used multi-missile ground artillery system against civilians, where like dozens of people were killed, like in just a couple days. So what are your perspectives on about the future, and what will the next Russian military approach, I would say, including this region? And in case of military perspective, would they escalate around Mariupol, or you expect it will be some like other like parts of Eastern Front? Thank you.
So, because they mentioned that this was on the record, would you mind giving your name and affiliation, and then kind of like a one sentence?
Yeah, I'm Mikola Varbyov, Ukrainian political and military correspondent, freelance.
And you're asking kind of, I guess, what my predictions are?
Yeah,
on what's
like your prediction.
Okay.
Your estimates, yeah. As a
Right.
scholar.
He is not a correct politician.
Predictions are always dangerous. So.
We're here to get it.
Right, of course, and this is obviously coming from just the perspective of a student pursuing this. There's obviously resources that I don't have access to. So as far as, it'd be really difficult to make an accurate prediction. So again, this is just kind of my opinion on what could happen next. It does seem that the Ukrainian forces are holding the city fairly effectively despite a lot of the violations. I think that it's quite possible the Russian-backed forces and the I don't want to say the Russian-backed government, but the forces that have taken kind of political control of some of those regions, they're probably, I see them pushing more for some of the political solutions because it's easier to get political pressure, especially from some Western media outlets, by making it seem as if the Ukrainian forces are responsible for the ceasefires or for the ceasefire violations. There have been some instances of that where US and other Western media outlets will maybe not explicitly but implicitly place the blame for those violations on the Ukrainian government. And then that makes it easier for them to say something like, see, this is why we should demilitarize Shirokine. Further military efforts obviously are possible. But as far as, right, I see them probably taking a hybrid approach, including the political pressures, if that. But again, it's very difficult, especially for somebody in my position, to make that accurate of a prediction.
I just would like to tell, because I'm involved with international strategy for peace, Dr. Krystyna Majewicz, and I'm both Polish and I'm Swiss, so I'm very much accustomed for peaceful solution. And all the chaotic situation, it's the consequences of a war after Second World War was divided Warsaw Pact and NATO. And now, Warsaw Pact doesn't exist. For me, mathematically, NATO should not exist now either. And we should create new competitive international organization which covers the whole world. And as long as this situation is NATO, no NATO, it will be born a lot of phenomena, curiosity, and it can be very dangerous. I used to know ex-president of Russia, Gorbachev, who very strong intellectual, with the best intention, with good future of humanity, dissolved Warsaw Pact. And he was pretty sure that NATO, as a gentleman to gentleman, will do the same. And it's my proposal to create new competitive international organization, such which can give a peace guarantee for the entire world. And my proposal is to use military for this kind of purpose, to an international organization of military leaders to prevent conflict, to prevent war, and space research. This means to jump to higher level of civilization and culture. And that is only solution. Otherwise, you know, plenty of all mathematical probability of conflict can be born.
Well, that's obviously much bigger than the topic of the discussion. I would appreciate any resources you can provide me on the solutions that, or the proposals that you just gave, because it's something interesting I'd like to read about. But it's obviously much larger than the topic that we're discussing today. And there's
topic you can solve when you have one global international games. When you don't have anything, it will be, plenty of curiosity.
Possible. The gentleman has had his hand up for a little while. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Andrew Seroka, I have no affiliation. I appreciate your fact-based approach and your citation of statistics. I would like to ask a little clarification about the statistics you cite on the linguistic and ethnic composition of Mariupol in the area. And I think it's particularly, I'd like to know how you view the relationship among ethnic identity, linguistic practice, and political positions. I mean, in my mind, these are three very different variables, and they don't necessarily coincide, but I would like to hear your view on that.
Okay. One second. So, I would agree that those are three different variables. They're things that I maybe haven't delved into as much as you, as with some of the others. I would be interested in any resources that you could provide. You do see, at least it is very easy to try and look at this and say, oh, well, look, there's 44% Russians there, so they're going to support this. And it's not that simple. And also some people would say, look, there's 49% ethnic Ukrainians, they're going to support the Western view of things. And it's not that simple. Without, I would say, getting access to more primary sources and possibly even visiting there myself. And obviously I couldn't go country to country or go region to region and speak to everybody, but without being on the ground and actually speaking with people and, again, getting access to primary resources, I don't know if I would be the one to comment specifically on how those might intersect in Ukraine especially. But the concept that you described, I would say, makes sense. Any other questions?
Would you take a comment?
A comment,
If
sure.
there's no one else asking, I don't want to use this opportunity. So in terms of Seroka, the region you mentioned, the reason why demilitarization has been such a struggle is because the zone proposed by the Russians, you don't struggle too much trying to identify who the people in the Donetsk and Luhansk are. It's very much a Russian administration, certainly at this point. They wanted the zone, the demilitarized zone, to extend to the city itself, to leave it unprotected.
Right.
You may mention this, and so I apologize. But there's a reason. So there's a very simple reason why it's been such a difficult challenge. In addition to the terrific reasons you mentioned already, that wherever the Russians proposed that, they have violated the agreements and just taken the territory as soon as the Ukrainian forces vacated, including the Bachelor and elsewhere. So it's a one has to dig really deeply. I'm very happy with the response you gave to the gentleman over there in terms of the ethnic and linguistic issue, because it's not simple at all. 2/3 of the people fighting on the Ukrainian government side in the east are Russian speakers as the primary language. So I'm told. So the notion, those who advocate that this is a kind of an east-west, necessarily ethno-linguistic conflict, are missing a big part of the picture. So I just to commend you on your response.
And then, right, just to respond to that, in some of the reading I've done as well, you're right that there's not necessarily, it's not that clean divide. A lot of I do agree with you in Russia's role in the region, but there are also some groups that they're not necessarily, from the resources I've read and from what I've seen, they're not necessarily patriotic towards Moscow. It's it's kind of meeting their desires for control in the region themselves, for control of these small regions that they've taken illegally. So that also plays into how complex the issues can be.
Which groups are these? If you remember?
I don't remember specific names of groups. I'm sorry. I can try and I should have it in the list of resources that I use for this, and I can try and send that to you if you would like.
Thank you. I'll leave my card.
Okay.
Thank you.
I guess it's also worth to mention that, so basically in case of full-scale offensive, they won't just like conduct any offensive direct on Mariupol. On the north, there is very important this water supply plant, how it calls it in English, I don't know. So basically they try to cut it somehow. I forgot the name of the village, but so all this water supply goes from this small town. They have these facilities. So it's also like crucial. So basically they would be just more interested to cut it from the electricity and water supplies and then just to encircle somehow, not just to conduct full-scale offensive, because like many people, even like pro-Russian and Russian speakers. So Mariupol was occupied, well, so it was controlled by these separatists. And I would say there are separatists, like combined Russian separatist force or whatever, was controlled in the like 2 or 3 weeks before it was liberated by Azov Battalion and other paramilitary organizations. Yeah, but basically even as pro-Russian people, they understood this like separatist republics, it's actually a fake. And even those who support Moscow in the beginning and Putin, in particular, this like Ruski Mir, Russian world, they just actually changed their mind to opposite, and now they're more pro-Ukrainian. Yeah, so basically there is no sense for them just to conduct somehow full-scale offensive on the town. So they would probably encircle it, cutting it from the electricity and other supplies. So it's my like perception. From what I heard in Mariupol, I was there a couple of months ago.
It's interesting that you mentioned that water supply in that town. I would be interested.
I can show it on the map. It's somebody showing it there. Yeah, and there is also, yeah, I agree that Azov Battalion, so the perception on the West is they are neo-Nazi. But basically, it was to mention that their commander, who was from the beginning, his name is Beletsky. He is a current member of parliament, and he was selected. He was elected, yes, in Kiev, in the most like in the downtown. So his district was in Kiev downtown in 2014. So basically, I would say that the rumors about their like ideological affiliation are exaggerated, basically. So maybe they use some symbolics. I think that they do need like some sort of rebranding. But I don't, well, I saw some of them I know in person, and I don't think that just like they're too like dangerous. And now they are members, they are officially, as a gentleman from State Department, he is correct, they're officially incorporated to the Ministry of Interior Affairs, so it's a part of National Guard right now. But there is one battalion, there is one, which just also need to stress, the part of another organization, Right Sector, is probably the last volunteer battalion which is not still incorporated either to the Ministry of Interior Affairs or to the Ministry of Defense. I would say like a couple hundred of them, they operate in the battle zone.
So, two quick things, I'd like to touch on again. What you mentioned about the town and the water supply. I mentioned the Kirk Strait Bridge and the Demilitarized Zone to show that the issues in Mariupol aren't happening in a vacuum. Obviously, there's a lot going on in that region, and it ties into everything else that's happening. And then everything that's happening around that town, around that city, ties back into what's going on in Mariupol. The trouble is, if I were to go into all of that, we would be here for hours. But again, I'd be interested in any resources you have on that particular town and the water supply. And then as far as what you were saying about the Azov Battalion, I have seen some things, especially like you were saying about their rebranding, the problems with the symbol that they've chosen and some of its historical affiliations with Nazi groups. I didn't put it up there because, as he said, the problem with nomenclature, and it seemed that there was some confusion with even what I said. I was not trying to make the claim that they were somehow neo-Nazi, and I didn't want to put that symbol up there and go into detail on it and possibly cause even more confusion about whether or not that was my belief. But I have read about the particular symbol that they're using on their flag. And I suppose that's a conversation that needs to happen internally. Even then, I don't think it would be my position as an outside observer to say yes or no, they should change their symbol. But again, thank you for that. And as with everybody else, I'd be very interested in any resources you all could provide because I want to continue studying this topic. Sir?
Gordon Middleton, Patrick Henry College. Thank you for your presentation this afternoon. The Kerch Strait Bridge, you mentioned some of the both engineering, logistics, permits, ground situation issues with that.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed that you painted that as a fairly significant piece in, I'll just say, the Russian strategy for the area relative to linking up with this potential land dimension. Because of all of those challenges, in the event it doesn't get finished, it only lasts 6 months, or whatever its political or engineering demise might be, in the event that bridge kind of goes away for any or all of those kinds of reasons, do you have any sense of what the Russian options or strategy might consider in the absence of that? You were asked to sort of forecast, and that's obviously challenging. But in that specific case, it seems like they have put a lot of chips on that approach. In the absence of that, however, did you get any kind of sense of either what options they might be considering or might be feasible or not?
The only, in my research, the only effective method of supplying the Crimean Peninsula with what it needs in terms of food and electricity and water is some kind of a land route. Obviously, shipping overseas can supply some things, but it can't supply everything. So, as you were saying, if the bridge didn't work, I don't see another option other than some kind of a land route. Now, whether that means taking the territory militarily or possibly trying to push for some, not necessarily a political solution, but kind of more of a public relations solution, trying to make it seem as though Ukraine was somehow preventing Crimea from getting the supplies that it needed, and then trying to pressure them into an agreement that would allow Russian resources and supplies to move across Ukrainian territory. I could see them possibly trying to push something like that, because again, it would be, I would say it would be fairly easy for them to get certain media outlets on their side and saying, look, Ukraine is allowing these people to suffer. You guys in the West need to tell them to allow us to do X. And then obviously using that as a way of kind of getting a wedge in there and making it possibly easier to then actually take those regions. But again, without some kind of a land route, I don't know how there would be effective supply of the peninsula.
On that question, the indigenous people of Crimea, the Crimean Tatars, their Majlis has already called for a complete blockade. So that's a very strong point in Kiev's favor. Number one. Number two, international law dictates that the occupying authorities are responsible for taking care of the humanitarian needs of the occupied population. So in those, Ukraine is not held responsible, legally speaking.
Right.
I know you're talking about something else, about perceptions, public pressure, things like that. But I just want to throw that out as well. Russia has the occupying power, has the responsibility for supplying territory.
Were you saying that the Crimean Tatars are calling for a blockade of supplies from Russia specifically, or blockading the entire?
From the rest of Ukraine. They have called on the Ukrainian government to cut off the peninsula.
Oh, they've called on the Ukrainian government to blockade the Sevastopol.
This is some time ago. Yeah, the representative body of the Crimean Tatar people called on the Ukrainian authorities to cut off the water, the electricity, other things, to undercut Russia's ability to hold the territory.
Right.
So that's a big, it only takes you so far, but that's a big factor in favor of Ukraine in this particular context.
And right, it is unfortunate that sometimes, even though the legal responsibility would fall on Russia to make sure that people get what they need there, often the legality of a thing doesn't necessarily determine whether it actually happens.
Of course.
If there are no more questions, I suppose we can close it. All right, thank you for coming.